Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminology, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, I want to pose the question when it comes to trashy books of how far is too far. So I thought this was an important topic to cover in the run-up to Garb August because trashy books, particularly older trashy books, can often be quite explicit in their sex and violence. They can cover things that are quite troubling in terms of sexual activity in particular. And they can also quite often have very dodgy politics. So they can be, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, you name it. If you can offend somebody about something, there'll be a trashy book somewhere that does that. So I wanted to talk about that concept generally, but also I was spurred on to make this video today by the fact that I've just finished what I think is probably the worst and most offensive book I've ever read. It takes a lot to offend me. So I read, as anyone who watches the channel will know, I read a lot of trashy books. And when I read a trashy book, when I review a trashy book, I will call out if it's got, some sort of content in it that I think might upset or offend people. But it's rare for me to actually want to speak out about a book rather than mentioning it, as an additional detail that people might want to be aware of. However, the book that I've just finished was so bad and so unpleasant in its politics that I wanted to talk about it. So if you watch my Saturday wrap-up video from yesterday, you'll know the book. I will get to it in a minute. But first, let's just talk generally about the kind of things that one might come across in a trashy book. So I've got a stack of books here that I've kind of, not randomly, but I've plucked from the shelves around me of trashy books that I think it's worth mentioning, some of the kind of different things that you might find in trashy books that that could be upsetting. So we've got the survivalist books, which is a series I really, really enjoy, but is definitely quite right wing and plays into that whole gun lovers fantasy of the apocalyptic scenario where you have to use your guns to survive, which at the moment more than ever with recent events in the States, gun fetishism feels more and more distasteful, in my opinion anyway. Next up, so I've not read this one, but this is one of the romance books I bought recently. So this is about a man, this chap, who falls in love and starts a relationship with his teenage adopted daughter. So I can see that there are some people who wouldn't like that. We've got the Edge books, so I've talked about these a lot on the channel. I really like the Edge books, but there is definitely content in here which is homophobic. So there's a repeating gay character in it who gets all sorts of abuse from the other characters in the book, in the books, and there's also a lot of. I hesitate to label these books as racist because I think what George G. Gilman does is quite interesting with his discussions of race. But there's definitely racism in the books, even if the books themselves aren't necessarily racist. But I think they might be, I'm not sure. Right, you can't talk about trash without talking about V.C. Andrews. So I haven't read this one, but clearly, V.C. Andrews' most famous series of books, the Dollenganger books, are about underage sex, incest, physical abuse of children, imprisonment of children. So again, troubling stuff. Again, haven't read this book yet. Firefly by Piers Anthony. There's at least one review on Goodreads that describes this book as a love letter to rape. So it definitely sounds dodgy and troubling. The Carpetbaggers by Harold Robbins. So again, not read this one yet, but I understand that it features incest, like the V.C. Andrews books, and he definitely features, all kinds of sex acts in his book. I've got The Happy Hooker by Xavier Hollander. So her book about her life in the sex trade. So clearly. And I think, and I haven't read the book, but I think it kind of glorifies that existence to an extent. So, you know, different people stand in, you know, at different points on the spectrum on sex work. But I think a book that, you know, that glorifies it, and perhaps glosses over the more unpleasant side of things, is, you know, definitely is a book worth discussing in some way. And then we've got Mandingo by Kyle Onstott, which is a plantation book, so all about slavery in the Deep South. And I think, you know, not a particularly balanced view of that topic, shall we say. Again, I haven't read it yet, so I'm not going to say more than that, but it certainly has a reputation for, you know, for being quite a racist book. So, you know, all of that kind of stuff you get if you read trashy books. And that's not to say there aren't, you know, there are definitely trashy books that don't have anything objectionable in them, but I think it is more common in trashy books than it is in non-trashy books. So it's definitely something to think about if you're going to do Garb August. You know, what are your personal limits? What is something that's going to offend you or upset you so much that you want to stop reading the book? Because much as I want people to dive into Garb August and enjoy reading trashy books, and, you know, discover my, you know, get the same feelings of joy that I get from reading trash, I don't want people to be upset or, you know, turned off or annoyed or disgusted by the books they read. So do bear that in mind. And if you want tips on things that, you know, that may or may not be too much for you, do feel free to comment. And I'm happy to give some direction if people think that will be helpful. Or jump on my Discord. We've got a Garb August channel there where we can discuss this kind of thing. So anyway, let's talk about the most offensive and horrible book I've ever read. So I consider myself fairly unshockable, both in terms of, you know, kind of sex and violence type of content, and also politics, because often I can just laugh at dodgy politics, to be honest with you. And I recognise that, you know, I totally recognise that books like, you know, Mandingo, which was a huge hit, or The Happy Hooker, which was a huge hit, have had a cultural influence, and possibly a negative cultural influence. You know, they may have persisted certain stereotypes and things like that for longer than those stereotypes would have persisted otherwise. And that's, you know, that's not a good thing. But there is also, I think, a kind of campness to outdated political views, that you know, you can make kitsch and amusing if you're so inclined. So this book then completely failed to do that. So I went into reading this book thinking that it would be a laugh. So the book is The Way of the Shadow Wolves by Steven Seagal. So yes, that's Steven Seagal, the actor. And Tom Morrissey. So let's talk about the cover first, because let's get the trashy, shitty stuff out the way. So that cover is amazing, isn't it? So just the photograph. So this is a novel. It's not non-fiction. Steven Seagal is not a character in this novel. So the fact that he chose to put himself on the cover of it is an interesting choice. And then you've got the wolf in the background, which just screams to me that kind of Three Wolves t-shirt. You know, there's something innately trashy about wolves, isn't there? So yeah, it's a really trashy cover, right? And The Way of the Shadow Wolves is quite a trashy title as well. So then we get the subtitle. So the subtitle, and you might not be able to see it on the cover, is The Deep State and the Hijacking of America. So again, it makes it sound like it's non-fiction, doesn't it? But it's fiction. And I'm not just saying it's fiction because I think it's bullshit. It is a novel. Then you've also got a foreword by Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So he, if you don't know him, and if you're in the States, you probably do. So he was a sheriff somewhere, I can't remember, but in the South, on the border with Mexico, who was famous, you know, reviled by some, praised by others for having a very hardline stance on illegal immigrants. He ended up being investigated for civil rights abuses, ended up being charged with contempt of court, and was eventually pardoned by Donald Trump. So clearly definitely a right winger. So what is Way of the Shadow Wolves about? So let's get the fun stuff out of the way first. So it is a conspiracy thriller with a fair amount of action in it, including kind of gunplay and, as you'd expect from Steven Seagal, martial arts. which is about a Native American police officer investigating a series of unexplained events and a conspiracy theory, a conspiracy that's going on behind them. Let's talk a bit about Seagal and Tom Morrissey, his co-author as well. So Steven Seagal, obviously famous for making a string of action movies in the 80s, some of which were good. I quite liked. I think it was called Nico. It might be called Armed and Dangerous in some places. And Hard to Kill, that was quite good, where he came out of his coma and went to get revenge. And then of course Under Siege, which is his big hit, which is a terrible film but a lot of fun, where he plays Chief what's he called, Casey Ryback, who's a chef on an aircraft carrier, but who's also a special forces guy. So yeah, he made some good, fun, cheesy movies. As his career progressed, he's gone more and more direct to video, and I think most of his more recent films are just bad rather than being entertaining and bad. More recently, he's become an outspoken champion of Vladimir Putin, which is, was probably never a good look, but is definitely less of a good look than more than ever at the moment. I think he was Putin's personal trainer for a while, and he's got dual or triple actually citizenship. So he's an American citizen, but he's also got Russian citizenship and Serbian citizenship. I'm not sure why he's got Serbian citizenship, but Russian citizenship because of his championing of Putin. So he's a bit of an interesting and dodgy character. Tom Morrissey is or was I think the head of the Republican Party in Arizona, a big Trump supporter. And I think he's written a couple of other books, but they look like kids' books, which seems a bit weird. But anyway, so they've co-written this book. So as I say, the fact it's got a Native American hero, I thought was quite interesting. Seagal has done a lot of work with Native American like police officers, and so he kind of knows what he's talking about. And I think there was a TV show where he joined a Native American police department and was went out and arrested people and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know if it was ever shown over here. I certainly haven't seen it. So that's what it's about. Now, where it gets really, really fucking dodgy, apologies, is when you find out what the conspiracy is. So the conspiracy is that an unnamed president, who is clearly President Obama, has, he's got to be president because he's got all these powerful backers, including international bankers, which I think is right-wing code for Jews. So he's got all these powerful backers who have got him into the White House. Now that he's in the White House, he's managed to get all of the arms of the US government infiltrated. So, like the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security, National Security Agency, everyone, alcohol, tobacco and firearms, or whatever they're called. Everyone's been infiltrated with these deep state operatives who are, doing the bidding of Obama and his minions. And what they're doing with that power is they are sneaking jihadist terrorists into the US by hiding them in groups of illegal immigrants coming over the border from Mexico. The sheriff, the Native American hero of this book, who's called, I think, John Goad, gets tipped off to the fact that this might be happening because randomly they keep on finding copies of the Quran just littered around the desert. So they know that there's something going on with Muslims. So that is such a deeply nutty, and I'm laughing about it now, but what's frightening about it is a lot of people believe this shit. So that is a nutty and deeply offensive conspiracy theory. And the book, the book involves him trying to, the hero trying to stop this conspiracy and stop these terrorist acts, which he manages to do at the end. And then there's a glimmer of hope at the end, because at the end a new president, again not named but clearly Trump, is elected, who's going to make everything right. So yeah, the book didn't age particularly well. I think it was published in 2017 or something like that. But what's really scary is if you read some of the Amazon reviews for this book. So let me read a few of those to you now. Okay, here we go then. So first one. So the headline for this review is Fiction. Hardly. This is a story that people need to understand. The characters' names may be different, but it is reality. Excellent. Fiction not. This is a true read. Amazing. You just put together what my gut tells me and what my eyes have seen. Stay armed and ready at all times. These bastards are Satanists and plan on taking our country. This is not happening. I am sounding my alarm. I am locked and loaded. This is the worst nightmare ever. Thank God I bought this book. It verifies the thing in my gut and my research. Here's another one. The book the fake news media doesn't want you to know about. Sensei Seagal tries his hand at writing with results you'd expect. A masterpiece of American literature. As a former deputy sheriff in Arizona, the martial arts guru has stunning insight into the happenings near America's wide open border. This book blows the lid off one of the great anti-American plots of yesteryear. The swirling cesspool of sinister drug lords, power-drunk deep state operatives, corrupt Wall Street bankers, Soros-funded terrorists, and spineless politicians serving themselves instead of the people in their collective bid to topple democracy worldwide. Remember, this was very close to reality until President Donald Trump began cleaning house in Washington. Another one, really interesting book, opened my eyes, that's for sure. Finally, somebody is telling the truth. Thank you, Steven Seagal. It took me a little longer to read this book than it normally takes me to read any book. I think it was because although the story is considered fiction, it occurred to me that maybe there was more truth, in capitals, behind the story than we realise. And what if? One, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. Some of these things I had already questioned in my own with my own research. Two, it would just confirm what others have suggested is really going on in our country. Three, we would be blindsided. So I would take breaks reading it, but it was a great book. I would recommend this book for everyone to read. The headline for this one is In God We Rust. So Y-R-U-S-T. I think that's supposed to be In God We Trust. Uncanny reflection of what is an ongoing operation happening in real time. I would recommend this as a screenplay in about 2 years. Next one, They Are Here. Treason is amongst us. Stay armed. Stay true to this our America. Enough said. Listen to your gut. So yeah, people believe this shit, which is a bit worrying. And you know, beyond that, the book is just it's not just crazy and horrible in terms of the central concept of it, but the way characters are handled as well. So the treatment of Muslim characters in this book, I think, borders on hate speech. It is truly disgraceful. And you know, for example, there are scenes where the hero, and this is the hero, tortures a Muslim character in order to get information from them by cutting them with a knife that has been dipped in pig's blood. So you know, it's that kind of level of hatred and Islamophobia that you see in this book. So it really is objectionable on every level, as well as just being dreadful. I mean, it really is. It really is bad in every way. So yeah, we all have our limits, don't we? We all have our limits in terms of what we will accept in a book, in terms of things that we don't agree with. And that book, maybe for the first time, you know, that definitely went over my limits. I did not enjoy the experience of reading it at all. So yeah, how much is too much for you? That book was definitely too much for me. I did finish it because I wanted to be able to talk about it, you know, in its entirety. I do object, I guess, to you know, people talking about books and criticising books because of things they've heard about the book, without necessarily having read the book. I think that's something that seems to be quite common nowadays, and I'm not sure. I think maybe there are some instances where it's okay, but often it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So yeah, hopefully you found that interesting anyway. Hopefully you haven't read this book, but I hope that you are reading better books at the moment. I hope you're safe and well, and I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.